What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. In my view, the biggest thing to understand about the way the current metagame has unfolded is that it is very hard to build a full tech deck. Tech slop, as it were, is kind of out because all of the things that were previously very universal answers have gotten nerfed, or new cards have come out that make them far less universal. So that has resulted in a lot of decks looking for pretty okay coverage in a bunch of different situations, and that's largely what Supergiant is leveraging here. I still believe that the Sauron version of Supergiant is generally superior to the non-Sauron, the Darkhawk version of Supergiant, although the Darkhawk version does have its own upsides, shuffling rocks in. The points are just so much better in this list, and more than that, when you look at this deck gets as close as anything does to having general tech coverage. So if you're looking for a deck that is able to have a bunch of reasonably good matchups into a bunch of different things, this is the deck that gets you there. You have Enchantress, you have Shadow King with the ability to put him down face down, you have Red Guardian, you have the ability to disrupt your opponent with the cards Supergiant and Negasonic. I don't know if this is a fair comparison because I think this deck is a lot better than, say, Serra Tech ever was. But if anything is the Serra Tech of the format, it is this. It's also a deck that has a ton of points and a really powerful proactive game plan. In terms of classic mid-range, one of the things that has really stuck out to me is a precipitous rise in the amount of Merlin werewolf decks that also are a lot of them using the zombie package. This is because at 3/4, Zombie Scarlet Witch is now a very powerful complement to a Merlin werewolf package, serving as a very powerful upgrade to your nut draw, and additionally as a sort of budget werewolf in the games where you don't have werewolf. In fact, sometimes it can be more than a budget werewolf thanks to Zombie Giant Man effectively making the value of every Horde investment you make double. This, to me, is the sort of classic KMBest mid-rangey deck that you would expect to see on a tier list like this. And I think that's for a bunch of different reasons, but largely just there's a lot of really good points in it. There's enough tech in it that you're not instantly dead in whatever matchup. And frankly, the numbers this deck can output are quite powerful compared to other lists in the same space. Generally speaking, like I talked about with Supergiant, it's hard for a deck like this to get enough tech cards in that it feels good across a variety of matchups. You kind of just have to wing it and hope it pays off. That is what this deck is doing, and you'll see that a lot of the decks at the top of the tier list have a similar ethos here. We don't have the ability to run Stardust and Mobius and Mercury anymore. We can't do that. We'll lose on points to a Supergiant deck if we even bother to try. So what we have to do is make sure we're beating them on points and then have enough tech in here in order to win the matchups where someone is going incredibly super tall with the multiplied Dakins or Invisible Woman First Steps or whatever it is. So this tier list is going to be fairly heavy on Cosmic Ghost Rider, on Red Guardian, on things that allow you to not be super dead to all of these cards, but are diverse enough in terms of what they affect that you're still going to be able to use them fairly well across matchups. The same ethos applies to Zombie Clog. Instead of using Cosmic Ghost Rider, this deck is using the Clog stuff as a method of keeping combo decks down. This puts it in a relatively polarized position where it's probably better than the other deck against everything that isn't Destroy or Merlin, but there is a lot of Destroy and Merlin running around, which can make using a Clog deck a lot riskier. One of the cards that I've really been impressed with in this list for reasons that are related to this is Daredevil, who I think normally I'd be like, all right, let's chuck Daredevil out of here. Let's get a Werewolf by Night in here. Let's just go do all of that stuff. But like, when we have such a minimal Clog output and there are enough decks that are meaningfully able to interact with it unless we really get the read perfect, having a card that gets the read perfect or helps you get the read perfect, that's really helpful. I don't love having to play Daredevil, but I think with a Clog package this small and the metagame being what it is, you might have to. So what are these synergy decks that people are so afraid of? Well, the thing is, there's just a ton of them, and you can sort of group them by what tech cards actually work against them. I think of those decks, Move is probably the best one, in large part because when you think about the tech cards that work against Move, several of them, Shadow King and Cosmic Ghost Rider chief among them, are the kind of things that are invalidated by Cosmo, by Juggernaut, depending on when they're happening. That kind of natural counterplay to the counters is really important. As decks start leaning more on Red Guardian, on Cosmic Ghost Rider, on Shadow King, and less on the card Mercury, I think this deck gets better and better and better and better and better. It's a very solid list that has a lot more built-in counterplay to the things that supposedly counter it in the current metagame. Obviously, this is a list that succeeded even when Mercury was a fairly popular card. I do think that people probably overstate how bad a Mercury is to see with this list. It's not so much about the Mercury, it's about the fact that the Mercury constrains you enough that a normal point package is able to beat you. So if you are able to play around the Mercury in meaningful ways, which I think good Move players are going to be a lot better at playing around the Mercury than bad Move players are, because it's such a stressed skill over the last few months, it is not nearly a deck that is so bad as you think it is in the matchups that you think are bad. I personally believe that this deck has a ton of upside in it. It is one of the best decks to play if you want to devote yourself to mastering a single archetype. An extremely potent list that teaches you a lot about Marvel Snap and is not nearly as dead as you think, even in the matchups that you think are really bad. Destroy is just a powerful list. It has the ability to play an extremely powerful top-heavy game plan when it gets Deadpool rolling. It's got a lot of locations that are just sort of tacitly good for it in ways that are not true of other decks. Things like Altar of Death and Death's Domain are just naturally good for it in powerful ways. It has no one tech card that specifically beats it, and it generally is pretty good against Cosmic Ghost Rider and Red Guardian things, barring, like, say, a Red Guardian hitting your Deadpool. There's just kind of a lot of inbuilt things that have made Destroy a better and better and better deck, and I think it's remiss not to mention the incredible influence of Moira X and Headpool on this list that have just added so much consistency, so much ability to take game actions, so many more small things that die and get you more small things that you can kill so you can play that death as easily as possible. It's just a much smoother experience playing this list than it used to be, and that is in large part due to those additional cards. This is a list that has a lot of power in it. It instinctively beats up on anyone trying to clog you. It has very good ability to go extremely tall. The biggest weaknesses it has are predictability, both in terms of snaps and in terms of what your final point output is. Your opponent knows what this deck looks like. There are really not a lot of variations in terms of this. The only big mind game you have is, am I going to Zola something on the final turn or not? It's kind of the rest of this deck is on rails, and you, if you're playing this list, are not even playing Zola, but your opponent doesn't know that. This is a very predictable deck that you're going to have to make smart, high EV plays with. You're going to have to make some reads about, like, okay, so if my opponent is staying here, maybe they have, you know, some kind of interaction. Maybe they have a Killmonger under an Invisible Woman. Maybe they have the ability to throw priority. Maybe they played a Super Giant and they put a Shadow King somewhere. All of that stuff is going to be how you have to think about this. The way Destroy you should probably be playing it is saying, they probably know what I'm doing. What is it that would convince them to stay, and how do I reasonably beat it? That kind of thought process is going to have to be how you play a deck like this that is very, very, very face-up. Like, sometimes you've just drawn your entire deck. They know it's a Null, a Death, and a Deadpool. What are they doing that's making them stay? Just start thinking about things like that. I think Cerebro has a reasonable argument for being the strongest deck in the game. And I don't think I have, like, a substantiated case here so much as I think this is just something that I intuitively believe. But that's why you're watching this kind of content here. It's just got so many different options and different builds. There are so many things that this deck has access to. Here you see a build based on the idea of getting Killmonger back into the list in order to deal with a variety of different things. People are clogging you, they're playing one drops off of Kate Bishop. Killmonger's just like a pretty good thing. And you also have Killmonger in a way that does not end up hitting your Horde, which of course costs 0, so effectively the deck gets to play a 1/3 that is unkillmongerable. Very cool little interaction here. But let's say you don't want to be doing this. Let's say you're like, no, we got to get Luke Cage back in. We got to play a more traditional version of this. How do we get some force multipliers going? Well, there you have Ghost Spider, you have Madam Web. You can even play Madam Web and Cobra against the zombie Horde decks. A very, very funny thing to be trying to do. Multiple man on the Madam Web. All of this stuff. There are so many different ways to build Cerebro, and they all kind of matter, but what really matters is, did you draw Cerebro? Because when you draw Cerebro, you're probably just winning the game. Fundamentally, what this deck has is enough interaction and enough power that it's going to be taller than basically every mid-range deck in the game, and they're going to have no realistic way to try to beat you. You are, with a modicum of competence, going to be 100% invulnerable to Enchantress, to Red Guardian, to Cosmic Ghost Rider, and those cards are really embarrassing when you're playing a 5/7 or a 5/8 or a 3/2, and your opponent is playing a Cerebro that has 3 power, and then a Mystique that has 3 power, and they're on a Cosmo lane, and you feel like an idiot because they played 40 points and you played 7. And that's the dynamic that Cerebro is leveraging. It's just really powerful on the final turn of the game. I made a video on this list. I think it is just a quite solid thing to be doing right now, in much the same way as I talked about the sort of Cosmic Ghost Rider-y mid-range nature of other lists. I think this list, leveraging Red Guardian, is in a very similar spot. Just here's a bunch of points. Here's a Red Guardian. If we don't have, the previous big downside to being an Afflict deck was when there was a lot of really useful and impactful tech that covered a bunch of spaces, was that this deck couldn't fit any of it in, right? This deck isn't a deck that has the ability to be a Mercury Mobius Stardust deck. It can't do that. But now that that stuff isn't as good, relatively speaking, now that things are in such a wider space in terms of what you need in order to interact with them, it's a lot easier to just throw your hands up in the air and go, look, whatever. If I run into the Mr. Negative Gamer, I'll take the L. I'm going to have a minimal amount of interaction and then a maximal amount of points so I can go power to power with the other mid-range decks. And this deck does that really well. Exact same logic here. No actual difference in terms of thought process. Same thing. It's just, all right, look at all these other mid-range decks. Now back to me. Now back to the other mid-range decks. Now back to me. Sadly, they're not me. I have more points. They're going to have to deal with that. That's what Agamotto's essential threat here is. It's like, all right, look, I have a couple of interactive cards. All of my interactive cards, notably, really good with Merlin stuff, really good with Agamotto spells. Like, you get a lot out of transforming a Red Guardian, for example. I am a Merlin werewolf deck. I have all this stuff. I've got all of these game actions to take. I've got a lot of points. I've got some interaction. I've got a Juggernaut. I've got an Enchantress, which can be whatever tech card you want. It can be Stardust. It can be Cosmic Ghost Rider, whatever. And in exchange, I also have a fairly inconsistent game plan. That's a reasonable trade to make, and I think it's a fairly solid direction that you can take the general archetype being discussed. The real question is, does this actually get you more points than playing the zombie package? And I kind of don't know. Like, the zombie stuff really does go quite tall. I've talked a lot about how the combo decks in Marvel Snap at this point are just sort of at a point where, unless you have the dedicated combo card, you're not really going to beat them realistically. The best you can do is like hope to drag them down to your level. There are very few matchups that are like, oh, I have the Mobius, Mr. Negative, you lose, right? So what I like to think of here is focusing on coverage. And in the context of focusing on coverage, a deck like this makes a ton of sense because Storm War Machine Legion covers every single combo deck on Earth. It covers Hela, it covers whatever you want it to cover. Hela, Cerebro, all this stuff. You have Storm War Machine Legion, you've got it covered. And so having this sort of inbuilt, like 10% of the time, it doesn't matter that you comboed because I comboed harder. That's sort of the floor of this deck. Like, that's the base premise here, is just like, whenever we do that, my opponent is going to be snapping the Mr. Negative and they're going to lose. My opponent is going to be snapping like their Bullseye combo and they're going to lose. They're going to be snapping their Destroy deck and they're going to lose. They're going to be snapping whatever it is. Whatever that thing they're doing is that has all of this synergy in it, they're going to be snapping it and they're going to lose because I'm going to make them unable to play on the final turn of the game. And then the rest of the deck is like enough good points that you have a functional deck outside of that, right? Like, yes, this deck exists because the combo has coverage against everything. But also the rest of the deck is like, it's a functional enough deck. Like, this is, to me, basically a like 45 to 48% win rate deck outside of the combo that also has the combo in it. And the like relative utility of being able to do a combo that covers every single possible eventuality is just a lot higher right now than it has been in previous metagames where you could cover all those eventualities with other combinations of cards. This is also the reason why you might want to choose to play Clog. I personally prefer the zombie Clog build. I think it's just a better deck overall, but this is not a bad list by any stretch of the imagination. It just is a bad list if you run into Merlins and you run into Destroys. It's a good enough list with some pretty bad positioning, but the ethos is the same, right? The ethos is, I don't think there's a combination of cards, tech cards, that get me to a point where I have coverage against everything. The days of old Shang-Chi being a universal answer at 4-3 because every threat was sort of in that vein before Invisible Woman First Steps came out and Thing First Steps came out and people were cannonballing and things like that. The days of that and Enchantress at 4-6 and Shadow King at 2-2 and all that, those days are gone. We are not there anymore. We do not have universal coverage. We live in America. So this is a deck that is looking for universal coverage a different way. And the biggest difference between this deck and the Storm War Machine Legion deck having universal coverage and previous tech decks having that coverage is cube equity. Because the way these decks get their coverage, the way these decks win all their matchups, is by doing it face up on the board. So you just have less cube equity built in, where these like turn 6 cards are normally a little bit better. And I think if you want to look at like why Marvel Snap is in this space that it's in right now, I think that would be a really good place to look. The good tech cards typically are face up. We just came out of a Mobius Mercury metagame, face up on the board. People are doing Clog stuff, face up on the board. Storm War Machine Legion, face up on the board. This is different from how it used to be. Tech cards used to be these face down cards that happened when the cubes doubled on turn 6. You'd be holding them until the end of the game. And that dynamic is part of what has allowed so many different combo decks to thrive, and part of how we've gotten to a point where because there are so many different combo decks, people do stuff like this to get that coverage back. All right, so let's talk about a bunch of combo decks. Mr. Negative is a very solid, very powerful deck that does everything you want in any combo deck. It has some of the highest output in the entire game. It's really only weak to Mobius. It dodges all of these half-tech cards, the Red Guardians, the Cosmic Ghost Riders. Those are usually not going to be meaningful in an average game against a Mr. Negative game player. It is an extremely powerful deck that, because of its longevity, also has some cube equity issues. People aren't really staying unless they beat you, and they pretty much know they're not going to beat you. Very, very, very powerful list, though. At baseline, extremely big numbers. In the negative space, we have Cougar's various Gorr vomit lists. This is basically an attempt at ethical Mr. Negative. It beats the same things, it loses to the same things, and it is a little bit more vulnerable to I don't know if people have noticed this. I feel like we're 20 minutes into this video, so I can say this. I feel like I've been saying vulnerable correctly and then thinking what I said was like vulnerable for like a month now, and then going back and saying vulnerable again. I've noticed this in myself. I don't know what's going on. I appear to be very vulnerable. Anyway, this is sort of basically just Mr. Negative. It's Mr. Negative with extra steps that makes you feel better about playing things that aren't Mr. Negative. It loses to the same stuff Mr. Negative does. It has some additional, like, people don't know what this is utility. Like, there is a lot of that built into this where it's like you might just win because people don't understand what your output is and you, like, anti-venom to Gorr or whatever, and they're just like, oh, there's like some weird Afflict deck or whatever, yeah? That's entirely possible. I mean, it gets less likely now that I've put it on here, but that is largely what this deck is doing. In a similar space, we have the Pixie Chef list, which is just another version of exactly what I just talked about. Combo, 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 combo. Oh, you had Mobius? You actually didn't, because you don't have the ability to legally put that in your deck. Because if you put a Mobius in your deck, well, guess what? You're going to lose to the move deck. Sorry, right? Like, all of these combo decks sort of protect each other, because there is, like, one card that beats a lot of them, but it's hard to get that card into your deck if you're a mid-range gamer, which is why we've been talking so much about coverage here. This deck, though, has the additional weakness, this is a little bit awkward, of being vulnerable to Cosmic Ghost Rider on your Warlock. Like, that's a little unfortunate, but generally what this deck is trying to do is do something really stupid, like Shuri Infinite Taskmaster. Go make that happen. That's 40-40. Nobody's beating 40-40 right now. There are some negative games if they don't have the Iron Man that they might not beat a 40-40. It's a powerful enough deck. It's just, you know, sometimes it's not going to come together. You're going to have a lot of retreat discipline when you play a deck like this. It's basically like playing Mr. Negative. The ongoing deck has exactly one tech slot, and it really pisses me off because I keep going back and forth between Mercury and Mobius and Stardust, and they all feel like they could fit in here, and I don't know. This is by definition, though, a combo deck. Like, people are going to act like, oh, it's not a combo deck. I would say the weakness that this deck has that is prominent is that Cosmic Ghost Rider is really, 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 really good into your Moonstone lanes. And Moonstone lanes are a big part of what gives you that combo level output. It is notable to me that this stuff gets super awkward. The sort of small Clog package decks are also pretty problematic for you. Like, there's, like, maybe it's supposed to be, you know, we get a Cosmo in there instead, and just, like, that's what we have to do. I don't know. I think it's entirely possible, but this is a deck that has just baseline, quite a lot of power output, the ability to play whatever tech card it feels necessary to disrupt its opponents or protect itself. There's a bunch of different things you can play in that Mobius slot, and it is sort of the mid-rangiest of the combo decks. The Splat deck is just looking to do some really dumb stuff with Prodigy Onslaught. That is the big thing that when I play against this deck, constantly forget. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this really awesome stuff, but if they have priority, they onslaught the Prodigy first. They just do really stupid things. It's not the hardest deck in the world to disrupt, but I don't think people are familiar enough with the play patterns of the list to actually feel confident about beating it enough of the time. I think it's very reasonable, very solid, and does some really straightforward gameplay things, but it is also sort of putting your hands in, I hope my opponent doesn't process what's going on here. And I know I've lost to this list because I've been like, all right, sick, I'm going to blow this up. I'm going to, like, Juggernaut them and Cosmic Ghost Rider them, but then they end up having priority, and they've already copied the Onslaught and doubled up the Mr. Fantastic in the back lane, and it's like, okay, well, it turns out I lose to Mr. Fantastic being doubled once, like, because I devoted all of my power to disrupting this middle lane with all my disruptive cards, and you're just like, oh, that's a little bit of an awkward spot. It just is doing strong things and obviously has some pretty pronounced weaknesses, but the numbers are big. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And thank you so much for watching. I said that already. Oh, God, I don't have a new one. I will see you in the next one. Remember to like and subscribe.